This is dark magic.
You're gonna keep the baby and there's nothing you can do about it.
I must perform the ritual myself in order to fulfill my destiny.
Talking Bloodbound, which is also known as The Dark Rite and also known as Bloodline. And this is directed and written by Richard Lemay. Now this is out in early 2019, middle of January. So let's talk about Bloodbound. Now, are you a fan of the 70s movies, particularly the kind of like the weird kind of like satanic movies that we kind of got in the 70s, you know, The Devil Rides Out, that sort of thing? Then you may want to be interested in checking this one out, because it kind of reminded me of those type of like occult movies that we kind of got in the 70s and maybe some of the early 80s. Now the story focuses on Sleepytown, USA, where we have ultimately these three teenage delinquents, and they are causing trouble for their parents, being a little bit of a kind of antisocial behaviour. They're actually breaking the law. They're kind of breaking and entering into people's houses and kind of holding them at gunpoint to kind of steal valuables and such. And then they learn of this new family that kind of moving to this particular town, and they are overheard talking about having some money in the house. So these three delinquents, of course, decide they're going to rob them. However, the tables are turned, you might say, as this kind of family has actually set them up to come into this house and be victims themselves of a much darker fate, unfortunately. These guys are actually some type of witches. They have a kind of a weird satanic-like ritual where each of these kind of three teenagers are kind of cursed, where they are going to be kind of bound to this family, and they can't tell anyone. They can't kind of, whenever they try and tell anyone about this family, they just can't get the words out, and they have a fate that awaits them in a kind of a very dark fashion, shall we say. And ultimately it's about these teenagers trying to maybe overcome and see if they can kind of get away from their inevitable fate. So let's talk Bloodbound. So this movie has a definite kind of foreboding atmosphere. And the thing that this movie does really well, it kind of sets up this kind of, this plot, and then ultimately it's a ticking clock, because you kind of know what's going to happen. So the movie is ultimately just this kind of countdown as the film progresses, where we know ultimately what the ultimate fate of our teenagers are going to be. And it's just like, can they do anything about it? Can they escape? Can they find a way to fight? You know, is there a way this kind of family can be kind of reasoned with? It's kind of like this cult of witches that all seem very kind of like incestuous and things like that. So I thought the story here, like I've said, it reminded me of the kind of the old sort of occult movies from the 70s. There's no kind of like, I mean, there's one kind of action set piece, I suppose, but for the most part it's a kind of a slower burn film with a really kind of intriguing and interesting story. What else works? I've got to say, I thought the acting was all pretty good across the board here. I thought everyone did a pretty good job of kind of selling on the kind of the emotions and stuff like that. I really was actually quite touched in some scenes where we have this kind of like this young teenage girl who is our kind of main character, and the way she kind of is with her family, her kind of father and her sort of stepmother. I thought there were some really great scenes here, and then we have one of the other characters who's got this kind of older brother who is, you know, a bit of a badass, and his kind of like, his kind of gruff attitude, but you can tell he does really kind of care for his younger brother. So I thought that kind of the emotional interplay between the our protagonist characters was all fantastic, but everyone does a good job. I don't think the kind of our witch family fare quite as well, but they're not bad actors. They just don't seem to have quite as much character about them than maybe I would have liked. I've got to say, on a technical level, I thought this movie was very proficiently made. I thought it looked great. The cam work, the lighting here, the sound design was all very good. The soundtrack was haunting. So that was all good. What didn't work for me, like I said, I think maybe the kind of our coven of witch-like characters seem a little bit underdeveloped. So in particular, kind of the female sort of members of the family, they just seem to be there to seduce people, but you don't ever really feel like they're actual characters. There's one kind of guy, there's two male characters, and they seem to have a little bit more to do, especially one of them who was a potential antagonist, I suppose. But the female characters seem a little bit short-changed to me, particularly when I feel there's some very kind of like drastic characterization on our protagonists. However, that isn't always a good thing, because although I feel the acting is very good from our three protagonist characters, the characters are made to be maybe just a tad too unlikable, because ultimately these do seem quite selfish people, and you almost feel to a degree that they're getting just desserts, so to speak. I mean, the robberies at the beginning seem very violent, so that's partially kind of part of why they were chosen, because they are kind of bad eggs. But nonetheless, as a viewer, you feel less sympathetic towards them, even though they are kind of heading towards a kind of a dark fate. What else didn't work for me? There is a scene where we kind of see our demonic entity that these guys are maybe you know, having to kind of worship. And I've got to say, I thought the demonic entity was a little bit weak sauce in regards to the way he kind of looked, because he just looks a little bit lame. Looks like a guy with some fangs. Yeah, he's going to be this kind of like this powerful deity, and he just looks a little bit kind of underwhelming to me. I would have gone with more of a traditional kind of satanic look with a goat head or something like that. If it were me, I think it would have made it creepy, but they try to make him look like some berserker type guy. That was a bad choice, if you ask me. And the other thing I had a little bit of a problem with is going to involve a spoiler. I will try to keep this as vague as possible. However, this, by very nature of me saying this, it is going to be a spoiler, so you have been warned. So if you're still here, trying to keep this as vague as possible, I've got to say, to make a compelling story, I feel you have to at least give the protagonists a chance to overcome the odds. Otherwise it just seems like you've just watched this, you know, there's no real story, because these guys simply don't have a chance. And one of the intriguing things about this movie is that the odds did seem so overwhelmingly kind of, you know, not in their favour. I mean, these guys can't speak with part of the curse is that they can't talk about anything that's happened. They just the curse kind of stops them having. But these kind of like these witches seem to have powers that just seem to kind of like do whatever they want. You know, they just seem to be almost unlimited power and kind of do whatever the story requires them. And you just feel like these guys simply don't have a chance. And for me, I don't like particularly rewriting films and scripts and stuff, but I would have maybe liked to have seen these, you know, even if it ended up the same way that it did, to have a feeling of maybe these guys could overcome it, and maybe they could have a chance of maybe surviving. But as it stands at the moment, they're just screwed, and they really just seem waiting for death ultimately. There's a couple of instances where just for a minute they think, oh, maybe this will work, but it's kind of short-lived. So for me, I think I would have liked to have seen maybe a bit more of a way that these guys maybe could have overcome it, a weakness maybe, or maybe not make these kind of guys, you know, seeming to be able to teleport wherever they want, and, you know, and be able to kind of like see the future and read minds. They're a little bit overpowered, if you ask me. Yeah, so it just undercuts some of that tension, I think, because you just think these guys, it's almost like watching the state of execution. So anyway, like I've said, that's kind of giving you an idea about how this movie sort of turns out in the vaguest way I possibly can without having to say anything. But anyway, overall though, I've got to say this is a very well made film. I thought it's somewhat of a kind of original idea in this kind of day and age of kind of more of a kind of a visceral style horror film, you know, that you kind of see in every kind of week that comes out. So it's nice to sort of see a more of a gradually creeping sort of horror movie that you kind of get in the 70s, like I've said. Overall, it was an enjoyable film. I'll give it a 7 out of 10. I think it was well made, despite some of the kind of the misgivings there. It's definitely worth a watch, I would say, if you like more of a kind of an occult movie, a kind of slow burn horror film. Have you seen it? What did you think? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.